Hi there, I am Lori Rivers, and I am the host of the Long COVID and ME CFS Holistic Healing Summit. But I wanted to share with you this clip of an interview that I did for the Holistic Summit. So take a look. Welcome back to the Long COVID and ME CFS Holistic Healing Summit. And I am so very pleased to be speaking today with Alex Howard. Now, a lot of you out there probably know Alex already, have heard of him and run across everything that he offers. He has been a leader in the fatigue/chronic illness solutions area world for a very long time now. He's the founder of several programs. He's the founder of Therapeutic Coaching, which integrates key principles from psychotherapeutic and coaching methodologies. The Optimum Health Clinic, which is an incredible creation. That clinic has led the way in really supporting recovery from fatigue-related conditions with patients in 50 plus countries, and involves a team of 50 plus full-time practitioners. And it's a world-leading clinic that has received many awards. And then he has so many things, Alex. It's amazing. It really is. And more recent, I think, development is called Conscious Life. And this is a leading online platform for conferences and courses, and has hosted events with people like, and I'm going to horribly just butcher his name, so you're going to have to help me out with it. Dr. Gabor Mate. Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's pretty
Yes.
good.
Yeah. I'm familiar with his work, but I always get confused about his name. And then Marianne Williamson, whom probably all of you know, Ken Wilber, Byron Katie, who was one of the first kind of self-improvement gurus that I personally ran across, and just tons of others. So just amazing things, Alex, that you have created here for us. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you very much for having me, Laurie. I'm excited to talk with you. And also just to explain to the audience that I'm in the studio here. There's a bit of a gap between the camera and the screen. So when I'm talking, I'd rather talk to the camera so I can talk to people directly, but you might see my eyes moving around a little bit so I can see, Laurie, your face as well, in case it looks a little bit strange. So
It's very cool. Yeah, he's not looking at notes for something else or
I'm not reading my email while we're talking.
right. No, you have his full attention. Yes, thanks for telling us that. Yeah, today I just went through all of these amazing creations that you have put into the world to help people out, whether it's in the more psychological realm or in the chronic illness realm. And today we're going to be talking about yet another of your creations. And this one is very well known in the world of MECFS and now long COVID. And that's your reset program. So but before we get into that, I always love to hear people's origin stories. So how did you get into all of this, especially around MECFS and now long COVID?
Yeah. So funnily enough, this wasn't my career plan when I was a teenager. I think my career plan, I still love live music. So my career plan would have been to be a musician. But like a lot of people working in this field or people that have interest in this field, I came through my own lived experience with ME, chronic fatigue syndrome. And around the time of my 16th birthday, I woke up one morning and it was if there was a plug of energy into my body, someone had just pulled that plug out. And it felt at the time like a sudden onset. It felt like it came out of nowhere. And I almost overnight had debilitating fatigue, headache, dizziness, exhausted all day, struggling to sleep at night. With the benefit of hindsight, can look back and see there were a number of warning signs prior to that. And I remember a month or maybe it must have been 2 or 3 months into this, going back for the umpteenth time to go and see my general practitioner. And I remember getting the diagnosis of ME, chronic fatigue syndrome. And we're talking mid 1990s here. So in a way that was a sign of a sophisticated physician that could actually identify what was going on. And I remember saying how long to get better. And they said it could be 6 months to a year. And that felt like a life sentence to a 16-year-old that loved music and sports and just finally managed to get a girlfriend after years of trying. And if you told me at that time that it was going to be 7 years until I'd recovered, that would have felt totally unimaginable in a sense. And to keep a relatively long story a bit shorter, a couple of years in, I got to the point that I was totally desperate. And I'd been to see various practitioners. I tried a few things. And at this point, it certainly wasn't that my mental health was the cause of my physical health, but it wasn't helping. And not because necessarily that I was predisposed towards mental health challenges, but when you can't you can barely get out of bed, you live in constant pain, you have constant debilitating fatigue, feeling, and no one can tell you why, and feeling anxious about that is a pretty normal human response. And feeling hopeless about your future when you're just struggling to get through the day, and that's been the case for several years at this point, feeling low mood and depressed and hopeless is also a pretty normal human response. And one of the things that would deeply frustrate and anger me was someone saying these physical symptoms are because you have this anxiety and depressive kind of feelings. Because it was so very clear to me that I had those feelings because of the physical symptoms that I had. Anyway, a couple of years, I reached the point where I wasn't actively planning how I was going to end my life, but I was starting to have thoughts that were difficult to get rid of. And I simply didn't feel I could continue living my life in the way that I was. And I had a conversation which fundamentally transformed my life. And it was a conversation with my uncle, who ultimately helped me realize that I could spend the rest of my life waiting for somebody else to find the answers, waiting for scientists, doctors, researchers, or whatever that may be, or my healing journey could become the most important thing in my life. And I had all kinds of beliefs at the time, very reasonable beliefs around I'm 18 years old. What do I know? And if no one else can find the answers, how am I going to find answers for myself? And I didn't have any energy. And anyway, long story cut short, I spent the next 5 years on a very committed and dedicated healing journey. I didn't find the answer. What I found was a lot of different answers, and I found lots of pieces of a jigsaw that fit together in different ways. And 25 years on, almost exactly 25 years on now from that conversation, having written several books on fatigue related conditions, and my most recent book, Decode Your Fatigue, which was published a couple of years ago, the reason why I called it Decode Your Fatigue was that to be able to map your path to recovery, you first have to diagnose what's happening. And I realized that on my journey, and it's true for the many thousands of people we've worked with over the last 20 or so years, that a diagnosis of long COVID or a diagnosis of ME/CFS or a diagnosis of fibromyalgia or whatever it may be, not a diagnosis. It's a label for symptoms.
Yeah.
And therefore it doesn't open up the pathways to recovery. And so anyway, my origin story is that I went through hell. I found my way to recover, and I'm very clear on the fact that what worked for me is not what's necessarily going to work for someone else, but developed a philosophy along the way that you have to have a personalized approach. You have to have an approach that integrates different ways of working, and you have to be evidence based and try and let the science do the best you can to let the science lead things. And I made a commitment to myself at that point of my sort of darkest moment that if I found a way out, that I would dedicate my life to helping others. And that's what I've tried to do.
Thank you. That conversation that you had with your uncle, and I remember us talking about this in another interview that we had, and that is so powerful. And I think that's a message that everybody needs to hear and really take to heart, because nobody else can do this for you. You've got to do it for yourself. But for you to really get that at 18 years old is pretty amazing. That's pretty mind blowing.
Yeah. I don't know. I am my future self, thanks my former self. I think in a way, desperation and naivety are two very helpful coexisting qualities. I was utterly desperate and I was totally naive. And in a way, if I knew all the things that I knew now, I might not have been so confident about the path I set upon. I don't know. In a way, it was a deep blessing. And at the time, it's funny, these things in hindsight, they sound, I wrote a book in my early 20s about my recovery journey, and people say, oh, that's such an amazing journey you went on. It was like, they're not amazing. Journey's not amazing when you're living it. It's absolutely horrendous when you're living it. It's one thing to talk about it afterwards and talk about the lessons, but the day-to-day grit of living through, I think, is incredibly difficult. And I think the responsible piece, what to me is important about it, is separating blame from responsibility, right? So it's not that one is to blame for being ill. In fact, there's likely a number of different complex, interconnected pieces that have come together to cause the experience of illness. But responsible means response able, that we are able to respond to what's happening. And how we respond to what happens is what determines everything. And if we don't believe that it's possible for us to recover, and we don't believe there are answers that are out there, every time someone mentions or suggests something, we're going to immediately push it away and defend it. And so it's learning to suspend that understandable cynicism, which builds up to protect us from all the things we tried that didn't work. And each time you invest your hope in something, you do it and it doesn't work, you often feel even lower than you did before you started. So there's a lot of protective mechanisms that come in, but the challenge is that they then get in the way of finding the piece, which may be one of the key pieces to changing the direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Really good point. Let's talk about the reset program and how that is one of these pieces of decoding your fatigue and rebuilding. Yeah. So, what is it?
Yeah, so let me lay out the framework and the context, and then we can come into it in more details. In the simplest way of putting it, the Reset program is a 12-week online coaching program that teaches people how to reset their nervous system. And so it's a combination of frameworks and understandings to decode and make sense of one's experience, and then practical tools and strategies that you learn, and a support system of how you implement those things to actually then work to reset what's happening in one's nervous system. And the origin of how it came about was that from about 2006, I think it was, to about 2000 and up until COVID started, actually, so about 14 years, every 2 weeks at the Optimum Health Clinic, we'd have a group of people. Well, it was 2 weeks for many years, and then we had slightly bigger groups once a month. People would come in and do something called the 90-day program, which was 3-day in-person workshop, which in of itself was obviously a limit for a number of people that could come to that because of the severity of symptoms. It was a 3 half-day workshop, and then a series of support and process over 90 days. So we had many people came through that in-person program and workshop, and we constantly refined it and tweaked it and explored different ways of framing things. And there's a real, for me, there's a science, but also an art to how you teach and design things, that you want to strip away complexity, but you don't want to strip away to the point that you lose the ingredients that actually make the impact. And that program was about 14 years of constant research and development. And then we did our first online conference 4 years ago now. So 2019, it's called the Fatigue Super Conference. And afterwards, there were too many people to put through the 90-day program. And that was a very international conference, and we couldn't put people through it in person. And so I took all the learning from that and put it in an online program, which is the Reset program. And it has been phenomenally successful from that point. And I think part of the reason why it's been as successful as it has is it spent so many years in research and development, that when it was put together in that program, it really impacted, and it seems to have just helped a very large number of people. And it's been updated and tweaked a little bit, but the fundamentals haven't changed since that first program 4 years ago, because it got 14 years of development before it first came out.
Right. That's great to know the background of it. And let's talk about the nervous system and especially how it's affected with these illnesses. But even like you said, I can look back to my life before even getting sick, and I can see how my nervous system was really dysregulated. And then also, once you get the illness, my understanding, my belief and experience is that the body actually, it affects the nervous system. The illness itself does as well. So if you were already dealing with dysregulation, and then you've got this thing that I just very distinctly remember because I had ME/CFS early on in my 20s, a little bit after you had it for 8 years, similar kind of experience, but then I also developed long COVID. It was much milder, but I remember one of my neighbors had a party, a 4th of July party with fireworks and all this stuff. It was right after I developed long COVID, and I thought I was going to go crazy because my nervous system was already so messed up. And then you had fireworks going off and people like riding motorcycles through our yard and all this other stuff. And it feels impossible to wrangle all of that together. Let's go through some of the basics with the nervous system. What are the different states? And how does the nervous system affect our bodies too? Why is it important?
Yeah. Firstly, to put it in the simplest terms, then we can come into some more nuanced ways of talking about it. At any one time, your body is in one of two states. So it's in a state of stress or it's in a state of healing. When it's in a state of stress, you are burning more resources than you're making. And when you're in a state of healing, you're making more resources than you are using. If we map that stress state a little bit more, there are different stages of that stress state. And there's also different types of stress within. So typically, the way that we are wired is for acute stress. This is where something suddenly happens. We need to immediately respond to it. And that thing that suddenly happens then has happened. And then we can come back to a state of balance. And so thousands of years ago, maybe we're walking along and we suddenly see a saber-toothed tiger, and we're either going to fight it, or we're going to run away from it, or we're going to hide and hope it doesn't see us. So we're going to fight, we're going to flight, or we're going to freeze. In modern world, that maybe we're walking down the street in London. We don't see the electric red London bus that's coming towards us. We see it a bit late and we have to leap out of the way. And so in those moments of acute stress, we get a hit of adrenaline, of cortisol. Our blood flow goes from our digestion to our arms and to our legs. And so we can immediately respond to that danger and to that threat. And if we fight it and we win, fine. If we flight it and we get away, we run away and we escape and we're faster, that's fine. If we freeze, it doesn't see us again, we're fine. If not, and we get squashed by the bus or we get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger, it's kind of game over anyway.
Yeah.
But assuming that we survive, we then recognize that we've survived, and then our nervous system can reset itself. And so our adrenaline, cortisol, stress hormones start to come back to normal. Might take a while to feel the impact because they're still, what's being released is still in our bloodstream, but we stop releasing more adrenaline and cortisol. Our digestion, which has been deprioritized, starts to function normally again. So we might have for that period become constipated, or we might have had diarrhea. That's why we use the phrase someone shit themselves, because
No.
what's literally happening is we're expelling, because digesting that food's not important. We want to get rid of it. So we have all the resources to respond to the danger. The difference between acute stress and chronic stress is with chronic stress, the stimulus to danger doesn't stop. And one example of that might be someone's living in a toxic or traumatic environment and they're in physical danger, and that threat's always there. And so they don't get the resetting of the system. What they get is a constant provocation towards being in a stress state. That stress could be having certain ways of approaching one's life which are unsustainable. A pattern like an achiever pattern where we define our self-worth by what we do and what we achieve, or a helper pattern where we define our self-worth by what we do and give to others. Our body says no, but our need to win love and safety, wherever it may be, says you got to keep going, and that becomes unsustainable. When that acute stress becomes chronic, our nervous system becomes dysregulated. This is what in my work I call a maladaptive stress response. It's a healthy stress response that's become maladaptive. This has all kinds of impacts on all kinds of bodily systems. It heavily impacts upon digestion, immune function. There's endless amounts of research that speak to this. Lots of studies looking at things like natural killer cells or NK cells in students around exam time. When they have stress of exams, their natural killer cells go down. Lots of research looking at impacts on things like irritable bowel syndrome, digestive function in many different ways. Dr. Robert Navio has done some fascinating work on cell danger response. And to put that in very simple terms, our mitochondria, which are our cellular energy powerhouses, they're like the power stations in our cells that make energy, have two functions. One is energy metabolism, the making of energy. And two is danger signaling. When there's a threat in the environment, because of how efficiently our mitochondria work, they need to spread the message of threat within our system. So my paternal grandfather was a coal miner in Yorkshire in England, and I never met him, but the way it worked in those days is they'd go down into the coal mine and they'd have a canary in a cage. And if that canary passed out, that meant there was a gas leak and they needed to get out very quickly. And so it was like an early warning sign, like it was telling that there was a threat and there's a danger. And so in a way, our mitochondria, when we're in under danger or threat, danger signaling becomes more important to survival than energy production. So we deprioritize energy production because we've got to sustain this maladaptive stress response. Sustained chronic stress is a causal factor in ME/CFS, or talking about long COVID, depleting the overall system. So when the viral load comes in, the system is already depleted and therefore it can't respond. And as you spoke to, Laurie, which I think is an important piece of this, maladaptive stress response may be a small bit, a medium bit, or a key bit in causing someone to develop ME/CFS or long COVID. But going back to what I also said in my story, when you're suffering from a medically unexplained illness, you don't know what's wrong, why it's wrong. Should you rest? Should you push through? Will you ever recover? You're being gaslit by medical professionals and you have all of this uncertainty in your experience. That is a survival threat. It feels like a survival threat to your nervous system. So what happens? We go into a maladaptive stress response, just trying to survive living with a condition day after day. And so one of our big discoveries in our work with complex chronic illnesses, particularly medically unexplained illnesses and particularly fatigue-related conditions, is until you switch off this maladaptive stress response, firstly, you're not dealing with one of the key factors, which is draining energy, but also this maladaptive stress response is often inhibiting other interventions that we may do to heal. For example, maladaptive stress response often leads to a overactive immune system. It's where you see mast cell activation. It's where you see food sensitivities, where you see reactions to supplements. It's not the only cause of those things, but it can be a factor in that. And so you have someone that can't tolerate the supplement protocol that they need, so you get roadblocks. You have someone which tries a certain intervention and it makes them worse, not better. And so this protective mechanism in the nervous system will tend to get in the way of other effective intervention. So it's draining the system and it's inhibiting other things that we may need to do. So resetting the nervous system, going from that stress state to a healing state, coming out of fight, flight, or freeze into a state where we're actually making more energy than we're spending, is for many people a critical piece of the recovery journey. For some people, it's the most, some people it's the piece. For other people, it's a smallish piece, but often that smallish piece is still critical to be able to unlock other pieces which may feel stuck or may feel like they're not moving.
If you want to find out more about how to access this particular interview or the whole summit itself, you can go to longcovidsummit.com, or you can also go to mecfssummit.com.